TikTok within hours. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening. I want to start tonight with the horrific accounts of sexual assault allegedly perpetrated by Hamas during the October the 7th attacks on Israel. And one account in particular, that of reservist Shari Mendes. She's not a forensic scientist, not an expert, but a volunteer whose primary job was to identify and prepare female soldiers for burial. She describes seeing bloodied underwear, faces repeatedly shot. She says she tried to give these women the respect they didn't receive when they were murdered. The Israeli government say they're preparing to make their evidence public. And the United Nations has urged any remaining living victims to come forward. But too much time has passed with no international investigation. And that's been the same for so many other conflicts, in Ukraine, in Ethiopia, in Sudan. Tonight, we'll discuss why there's been no concerted global effort to seek justice for those raped and assaulted during war. But let's begin with Shari's memories of those days in October and a warning that she does describe in detail how women's bodies were mutilated.
Our unit was activated immediately on October 7th. My shift came in on Sunday morning, October 8th. I got to the base and it was unimaginable in two ways. It was unimaginable in terms of scale, the numbers. There were body bags everywhere. They were lining the corridors. They were lining up in refrigerated trucks coming into this Shura Army base where our unit is focused. Every single victim of the October 7th massacre was brought to this base. So it was unimaginable in the sense that this is a large facility, and the halls were lined to the ceiling with body bags. The smell was unimaginable. I can't tell you enough the shock and despair that struck all of us.
And what were you seeing? You know, as you say, there were body bags, the horror of it. In terms of the women that were coming through, some of the women that were coming in, what were you seeing?
They were shot so many times in the head that in many cases it was like there was a purposeful obliteration of women's faces. We also saw women came in not very dressed, and they had often very bloody clothing, if they had any clothing, they had very bloody underwear. Women were shot. Our team has seen women shot in the crotch, in the genitals. Women were shot in the breast.
You saw this?
Our team saw this, yes. Women had legs cut off. There was a lot of, it seemed like there was a systematic genital mutilation of women in the women we saw. Sometimes we were told to run, and part of what we did was accompany these women. That was part of our purpose, and we never wanted to leave them alone. But they told everyone who was working on the base, you have to get out. There's a danger. And what was it? People were coming in booby-trapped, and sappers had to come in and clear the situation so that we could go back in.
I mean, the things you're describing, totally horrific. You've said you're not a forensics expert, but you were witnessing some of these horrors against the women that were coming in. What were the forensics experts saying? Were they asking you to collect the sort of the clothing and some of the body parts? I mean, what was the kind of exchange of information that you had with the forensics team?
So the purpose of our unit was actually more a Jewish religious role. We were in the examination room because we were there to accompany these women. We often opened body bags. We washed jewelry of blood to give back to families of the deceased. I remember one woman had her arm and her leg were broken in so many places that it was like handling marbles or sand. And at a certain point we said, we'll just put a white sheet on top of her. In the examination room, We did not do any, there were experts in that room. We were there to accompany the people, but then we moved to a room, a separate room, that was more for us. It was a burial, preparation for burial room. And in there, it was just our team, women, dealing with women. And it was a different atmosphere. It was less rushed. We are not forensics experts, but we felt very strongly that we wanted to give these poor women some respect that they didn't get when they were horribly murdered and mutilated and disfigured. And it was our job to honor them. They could have been our daughters. They were the same ages as our children. And we figured we probably would be the last people to ever see them. So just for a moment, we loved them.
There's a lot of conversation around rape, sexual violence being used as a weapon of war. And as you say, you're not an expert. You were dealing with the bodies. But I guess this is also now part of the conversation around this as Israel collects the information and the data and the evidence for this. There's also people questioning, the kind of evidence. I mean, what would your response be to that?
I would have to say that this is still very early. Israel is still, rockets are still flying at us. We're still in very early stages of an investigation. We're still in shock. We're still in a deep state of trauma. 1,200 people were murdered. We still have 136 hostages. People can come to their own conclusions about whether or not physically, from the testimony I'm giving you, what happened to them. There's an awful lot of eyewitness testimony that saw rape. There was a time in not too recent history when eyewitness testimony, and there's an awful lot of it, was enough. I'm the child of Holocaust survivors, and all we ever had to know what happened to most of our family. My mother survived with her parents. Almost all of our extended family was murdered. We knew what happened to every one of them from eyewitness testimony. That may be the best we'll do.
I mean, that's the thing. When you see conflict, women are the first to be impacted. They're the first to disappear in times of war. They're the first to sort of be impacted, women and children, by conflict. And yet their testimonies and their experience isn't necessarily acknowledged in a lot of places around the world. We've seen that happen time and time again, especially when it's come to rape being used as a weapon of war.
If people are not believing them, it's hard enough to come forward. If the world believes you and embraces you, and rape victims need to be believed, if these women are being questioned about the veracity of their claims, why should they come forward? And I think we have to be patient. They're very traumatized, and it may take time. We're 117 days into this war. It may take a lot of time for these women to speak out, if they ever do.
Shari, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Yalda. Thank you.
That was the testimony there of Shari Mendes, a reservist with the IDF. Let's bring in tonight's studio guests, Matthew Barzun, former US ambassador to the United Kingdom, and Nabila Ramdani, journalist, writer and broadcaster. Thank you both for joining us here on the programme. Nabila, I'm going to come to you first. I mean, just ending on the point there about rape being used as a weapon of war. These are serious allegations, and we can talk about, the evidence and the investigation in a moment, but just your reaction there to Shari Mendes about why should women come forward if ultimately they're questioned?
Well, as you quite rightly said, and as Shari said herself, these are very serious allegations, and that's why I think they should be investigated in full. And might I say right away, that talking about such allegation in a rational and sensitive manner is always going to be difficult, especially when expressions such as Holocaust grade or indeed mass rapes are used in the discussion, because they sound so definitive. And that's why the need for full investigation is crucial, because it needs to be in line with due process, and it needs to be not just simply based on testaments from army reservists or indeed affiliated officials. That's crucial. The New York Times, for example, has just published an article where they cast doubt on earlier anecdotal stories, and they point to inconsistencies in some witness statements and indeed changing stories. And they, for example, say that investigative journalists are now challenging original rape reports. So again, you know, war is vile under any circumstances, and as we are seeing in this particular conflict, the Israel-Hamas conflict, there have been particularly vile actions happening, including thousands of women being killed, children, including babies, women, including pregnant ones, and men in their thousands as well, mutilated and killed. There's clear video evidence of such atrocities happening, and indeed bodies being mutilated and indeed obliterated. And so I think...
I mean, you know, Israel has now said that they're going to provide evidence that they will make that public. And the United Nations is currently in Israel and is talking about the fact that they're asking for more victims to come forward.
Matthew, very quickly, if I may, in the context of when Israel is literally facing, you know, accusations of genocide, quite rightly, these allegations should be investigated on the basis of hard evidence and due process. And you would expect, you know, any allegations of war crimes or indeed such atrocities to be investigated with the same amount of scrutiny.
Just to pick up on what Nabila is saying there, I mean, the point, though, of this situation in particular is that it does take a long time. And you know, we were hearing there from the reservist, Shari, saying, I'm not an expert. I can only tell you what I saw as I went through the bodies.
Well, I mean, watching that interview with Shari that you did, and I was thinking about being on what I'd say, and the first word that popped into my mind, hearing that list of atrocities, just the ones that she witnessed, and then you add to it the New York Times and other reporting, and the word that came to mind was, this is just unspeakable. And then, of course, you realize that's the wrong word. If it remains unspoken, justice cannot be served. And so brave people like Shari, you for asking those voices to come up in a methodical and rigorous way is crucial.
Sorry, go ahead.
Might I simply suggest that in 2024, you know, we should be relying on physical evidence rather than just the testaments of, again, affiliated officials or indeed army reservists. And let's be honest, you know, they have this kind of rhetoric or indeed, you know, this kind of way of portraying your enemy as mass rapists has been used for centuries.
Yes, but I guess, you know, some of the points that were being made, ultimately, if it's even one woman, you know, that these need to be investigated, these cases.
Because, you know, accusations of rape have certainly been made against enemies in contexts of war for centuries. Germans were accused of mass rapes during the World Wars, so were the Vietnamese, so were the Russians. And so I think it's important, you know, to bear in mind the kind of rhetoric that also coming out from, you know, extremists within Israeli society, for example. And the idea is if you portray, you know, people who come from, as they say, barbarian communities, and they are depicted or projected as sexual deviants and indeed vile killers, then you are demonizing an entire community and not just Hamas, for example.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear on, you know, what happened on October 7 was a horrific situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah, and I think and I keep turning to words just because at this juncture, they really do matter. And to bring awareness to those of us who aren't in that part of the world, obviously come from the United States, and for people to to first understand and then not forget what actually happened. And I thought the first interview, given what she had been through, was incredibly calm and deliberate and not overstating and not engaging in, to your point, I think, Nabila, demonizing or categorizing with groups, describing actual victims and actual physical horrific mutilation as she saw it. And that
Well, we're going to
and didn't engage in the sorts
We're
of things
actually going to continue this conversation. I'm just going to, continue with the other pieces that we have, because the story of sexual violence being used as a weapon of war is one we've heard so many times before. Let's just have a look. Women and children, often the most vulnerable in conflict. Their bodies often bear the wounds of war. We've now heard the allegations of sexual violence in Israel and Gaza.
I was there for 51 days. There wasn't a minute that we didn't go through something, abuse in all forms. And they are still there, surviving, barely.
These accounts are part of a wider global picture. So, how has sexual violence been used as a weapon of war? Well, the past century offers too many harrowing examples. The systematic rape of women in Bosnia. An estimated 200,000 women raped during Bangladeshi independence in 1971. And in Ukraine, harrowing testimony from the devastated Bucha on the outskirts of the capital, Kyiv.
Не как матери, а как, извините за выражение, как проститутки. Жінки, які їх теж, я знаю багато жінок, не мовчіть, розказуйте, їх треба покарати.
In Ethiopia, a conflict flared 3 years ago. One hospital treated 200 victims of sexual violence in 2022. Peace has held in Tigray, but the trauma experienced by women and children there may never heal.
هذه الناس أو أنحية لتنقل قاتل أموال لا إذا ما أسير بخمس جرام إيدي أسيرة هم مش تقدر لا تواري اللي قنيا.
Sexual abuse is often used as a deliberate military strategy. In Myanmar, it's been a hallmark of the country's war against its ethnic minorities. In 2017, in Rakhine State, 750,000 Rohingya Muslims were forced across the border into refugee camps in Bangladesh. Entire villages were razed. Tens of thousands were killed and women and children were raped. Senior military commanders, some now in government, have been found to be complicit. As a United Nations team in Israel examines reports of sexual violence during October the 7th, there are now calls for an international strategy to protect the most vulnerable. Well, today I also sat down with the Conservative peer, Baroness Helic, who's now campaigning for an international commission to investigate rape in war zones. She told me she'd heard similar stories all around the world. Have a listen.
It is widespread. It is not consigned to one country or one region or one particular conflict. We have seen it, and we can see it still in Sudan, in Myanmar, and we have seen it in the examples in Ukraine, and just about every single conflict over the last 30 years that I have been aware of, starting with the Bosnian war, has had this element of atrocity being committed, particularly against women and girls.
What do you believe should happen now?
I think we should take this crime for what it is, not something that is of a secondary importance, not something that is a lesser crime, which there is often a perception that this is a lesser crime when you compare it to everything else that happens on a battlefield. So what we should try and do is learn lessons from all these experiences and try and come together and see whether there is a way of trying to address this gap in capability of collecting evidence, presenting it in court and standing it up in courts, which is often the case that you don't have that capacity and capability to stand it up in court, so that we replace impunity with accountability, so we don't embolden perpetrators and we can actually push back and create a deterrent so that these crimes do not happen. Seriously, if you look around, it is really underreported what is happening in Sudan today, and what is, for example, only in one province last year in DRC, there were 38,000 cases of rapes that were recorded. And that is something that we need to try and find a way of pushing back against.
Yeah, I mean, when you see those sorts of stats, UN reports talking about thousands of women in one particular province over a certain period of time, it's the mind sort of boggles at how that could possibly happen. You have also proposed a body being formed, a sort of global body that's apolitical, that can address these things directly.
Yes, I think that there is high time that we come forward and set up an international body that can actually have experts and knowledge and capability that can be deployed at short notice, so that in cases where there is need to have an investigation, that investigation is being done by experts, that those who have survived or those who have witnessed those crimes can be interviewed without re-traumatizing them, and that the evidence can be collected in such a way that it actually can be admissible in court. It's often the case that the evidence is not collected, is not preserved in a way that you can actually take it to court and really present it. And I think it should also be a body where we can learn from each other, where we can share the knowledge, so that experiences from one conflict can be implemented in another context. And only by pulling all our knowledge and all our expertise together, I think we have some ability, or we will have some ability to address this issue. Otherwise, we are in this perpetual cycle of violence that we are incapable of breaking through.
Baroness Helic, always grateful for your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Baroness Helic there. I've got my panellists here with me. I mean, Matthew, this idea that a international body can be created that perhaps can deal with this, because, of course, hundreds of thousands of women globally, if not millions, are impacted as a result of sexual violence being used as a weapon of war.
Yeah, and I was talking to a journalist, a colleague of mine at Tortoise Media, who knows a lot more about this than I do. And we talked about it a little bit before we came on set. It was when I served as ambassador 10-ish years ago, William Hague, who was foreign secretary at the time, teamed up with Angelina Jolie to bring attention
Baroness
to
Helic actually was part of that.
Yes, that's where so I got to know her a little bit during that. So the PSVI, Preventing Sexual Violence Initiative. And it got a lot of sort of spotlight and attention, and then of course our attention turns elsewhere and the atrocities continue. And I am really hungry I'm no expert, but it would be really interesting to get, and the UK has lots of them, in related global efforts outside of this context, and including this context, to say what are the times where the world comes together with the best of intentions to eradicate horrific events, and where we get it wrong, where we have unintended consequences that end up preventing it. And she touched on one that this journalist colleague told me about, which is in a lot of the standard judicial procedures at International Criminal Court, for instance, these victims are forced. It is weirdly and perversely perpetrator folk. They don't mean to be, but these poor people have to re-traumatize themselves, not once, and the bravery that takes to relive this awful trauma, but multiple times for every single perpetrator. They have to go say the exact same thing over and over again. And that is, and she addresses that, things like that are meaningful process changes that can make a big difference. I'm sure there are others, and you, I'm sure, have.
Yes, I mean, Foreign Secretary William Hague confronted, the use of rape as a weapon of war. And I was very impressed that he made a direct link between seeking justice in order to achieve peace and indeed security. No, that's very important. And again, crucially, that's why we need full investigations. And as the Baroness was suggesting, we can learn from history, sadly.
Because there is a sort of outrage and then very little done to deal with it.
Yes, but we know, sadly, from previous conflicts where such vile conduct has happened, that these tend to be the consequences of occupying armies. For example, men who spend weeks and indeed years living with their enemies. Now, in the Hamas case, the claim is that a relatively small force of invaders intent on killing and abducting as many people as possible in a small time window somehow created time to conduct mass rapes as well. Now we know that most of the attackers on the on October the 7th were killed on the night itself, within a few hours and certainly before nightfall.
Well, so again, all of these claims, as you say,
and precisely.
I do think, and I'm no expert, watching some of the verified video footage that you see of, and now we know her name, and I don't, of the young Israeli-German woman who was killed in the back of the pickup truck and then paraded through. So it doesn't seem to me incongruous that you can do a surprise attack, kill, rape, murder, mutilate all at once.
Yeah, I mean, yes.
That doesn't seem, I mean, it's...
The basic point is that the murders of the attackers were captured on video, for example, by helicopters and the like. And any investigation should be underpinned by, hard evidence in order to achieve justice.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what it's about, achieving justice
Precisely.
and an investigation taking place. We will keep you both here with us because as today, the bosses of the world's biggest tech companies were grilled in the US Senate. We'll hear claims platforms like TikTok and Instagram have blood on their hands and are destroying lives.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I'm based in Belfast, a city transformed by peace, but still struggling with its past. Politically, the two sides are as far apart as ever, and it's over that question of who has sovereignty in Northern Ireland, the very issue that's been the source of tension here for generations.
It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century.
I've spent 25 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
We help you understand the world with us.
Today, we have reached an agreement with the Conservative Party on support for government in Parliament.
We already know what the government gets out of this deal. What exactly does the DUP get out of it? Well, £1.5 billion. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama.
Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record.
You can't live in a place like this and not appreciate the environment.
Welcome back. Is social media a danger to our children? Well, today, US senators made their opinions clear, grilling the likes of Mark Zuckerberg and other tech bosses on what they're doing to protect kids from exploitation. And the feeling from those senators and bereaved families who were in the room was that it's not enough. During a tense session, sites like Instagram and TikTok were accused of destroying lives. Our science and technology editor, Tom Clark, has more.
The titans of social media didn't want to come to Capitol Hill. In fact, CEOs of Snapchat, X and Discord had to be subpoenaed to force them to face Congress. But as the hearing opened, first they had to face the stories of those who say their lives were destroyed using their apps.
I was sexually exploited on X.
This is my daughter, Olivia.
This is our son, Matthew.
My son, Riley, died from suicide after being sexually exploited on Facebook.
After the video, the grilling began.
Mr. Zuckerberg, you and the companies before us, I know you don't mean it to be so, but you have blood on your hands.
Senator Ted Cruz challenged Meta's Mark Zuckerberg why, until it was exposed by the media searching for child pornography on Instagram, was met with a message warning users, but allowing them to see results anyway.
In what sane universe is there a link for see results anyway?
Well, because we might be wrong. We try to trigger this warning, or we tried to, when we think that there's any chance that the results.
Okay, you might be wrong. Let me ask you, how many times was this warning screen displayed?
I don't know, but the
you don't know. Why don't you know?
Well, this hearing is in the home of big tech. Their products are global. Aged 14, Megan Hinton was tricked into sharing explicit images of herself over Snapchat by someone impersonating another user.
I think the only way I can describe finding it out was complete and utter betrayal. Like my stomach had just dropped to the floor, felt completely sick. I felt utterly ashamed, embarrassed, guilty for sending it. And that impact has definitely stayed with me.
Despite efforts to have the images removed from various platforms 5 years after she went public with her story, they were still online. That and much else besides, she says, is for big tech to fix.
I would like to see them actively engage and participate in online safety instead of just being tokenistic. They have the money to make online environments safe. Please spend it.
Snapchat's CEO was the only one to tell Congress he supported a draft US law similar to the Online Safety Act passed here in the UK last year.
Senator, we strongly support the Kids Online Safety Act, and we've already implemented many of its core provisions.
Then, unexpectedly, Mr. Zuckerberg was invited to stand and apologise to families who'd lost loved ones.
I'm sorry for everything that you have all gone through. It's terrible. No one should have to go through the things that your families have suffered.
A key moment, perhaps, in the dismal history of child safety on social media, but unlikely to mean much unless new laws allow the most vulnerable to hold the most powerful in tech to account. Tom Clark, Sky News.
Well, joining me now is Arturo Bejar. He worked on safety at Meta over the last decade and claims his efforts to flag problems to senior leadership at the company went unheeded. Thanks so much for joining us, Mr. Bejar, on the programme. You were listening there to the hearing via a live stream. Just give me your reaction to it.
I think that the lack of empathy and understanding of the harm that these companies are facilitating was stunning, right? These products, there's plenty of data through what I brought to light and internal emails about the harm that teens have in these different products. And they have the capacity to make it better, yet they choose not to do so.
And why do you think they're choosing not to? Because in your time, you say that you actually put certain measures, safety measures in place. The second time you went back to work at Meta, they were removed.
Yeah, the first time around, the goal was to create products that were measured by how much they helped teens with the harms they were experiencing. Instead, those products got removed. And now the number of teens that experience these harms is stunning. And it could be as easy as them to add a button where a teen is able to say, I've received an unwanted advance. They have the capacity and the technology to make this better. They have the infrastructure. They just don't have the will or the priority to do so.
And why do you think? I mean, we've seen these tech bosses multiple times, come and address the US Congress. They are questioned over and over again. And yet, you're saying that the will isn't there.
The only thing that matters is their actions. You saw an email from Nick Clegg asking for 84 engineers of a company that had over 30,000 engineers at the time. And Mark was not willing to give those 84 engineers to help with issues that would have saved Molly Russell's life. It's one of the things in Nick Clegg's email is self-harm content. And so
I guess,
if they want,
what you say that the will isn't there, you know, they have the capacity, but they're not doing it. Actions speak louder than words, is what you're saying. But I'm just trying to understand why the will isn't there. We continually get told when we see them at these hearings that they will bring about change. They continue to be asked questions. They continue to be told to put regulations in place. You're saying that they're unwilling. Why?
You have to ask Mark Zuckerberg that question. But when the senator put in front of him the harm that people are having on Instagram, his response was to say, oh, but we make it better in this other way, which is so disingenuous, right? Ultimately, they should be transparent about the harm that teens are experiencing. And the only measure that matters is whether we're able to help the teens that have experienced harm. Until they commit to doing that, nothing's going to change.
Arturo Bejar, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme.
Thank you for having me.
Next up, pinning blame for the deadly drone attack. Joe Biden names the group behind Sunday's attack. Are we one step closer to seeing how America will respond? Welcome back. We already knew who was responsible for Sunday's deadly drone attack on an American military base in Jordan. But tonight, the United States officially pinned blame on the Islamic resistance of Iraq. Does that mean we're now a step closer to seeing the United States respond militarily? Over in Washington, the Defense Secretary Grant Shapps met with his US counterpart, Lloyd Austin, today. Well, let's bring in our US correspondent, Mark Stone. And Mark, obviously front and centre of the conversations will be the Middle East.
Yeah, hi Yalda. Grant Shapps, his visit today is one piece of a jigsaw of meetings that are taking place a lot at the moment, and particularly today. Grant Shapps met, of course, with his counterpart at the Pentagon, Lloyd Austin. I imagine Ukraine was a focus of that conversation, but the key focus would have been the war in the Middle East. Interestingly, he also met with the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, at the State Department, a private meeting, no cameras at that meeting, but I thought that was interesting. We know, too, that the Secretary of State has met with Ron Dermer, a senior official from the Israeli government, and has also met with the UN's chief, who is in charge of the humanitarian situation, trying to get in charge of the humanitarian situation in Gaza, too. Two focuses, I think, for all of those meetings. One is the prospects of another pause in fighting. Sources I've spoken to today say that the progress is happening there, potentially a 45-day pause in fighting to allow for hostages to come out and aid to get in. We've heard that before, though, haven't we? The other focus, of course, is America's response to that drone attack at the weekend. I don't think we should expect the Brits to have any involvement in that response, whatever it is. Remember, the Brits were involved in attacks against the Houthis in Yemen. This time it will be an all-American response, and the White House has said today that the first thing you see will not be the last. We expect that whatever response it is, it will be a series of measures, of attacks that take place against Iranian proxies in the region. But for Joe Biden, it is a huge decision that he will have to make. And incidentally, he is going tomorrow to Michigan, which is where the largest group of Arab Americans live. He has domestic political implications for all this too.
Mark, thank you so much for bringing us up to date there from Washington, D.C. Let's get reaction now from our panellists. Matthew, I'm going to come to you because, of course, you were the US ambassador here in the UK. I mean, how would you assess President Biden's reaction, response, whatever strategy he may have? I mean, some people are describing it as a bit of a mess.
Oh, I don't. You would probably expect me to say I don't agree, and I don't. Mark's report, it reminded me, I would sit in those meetings, and I think that image that the viewers just saw of the British Secretary of Defense and the American one sitting opposite each other with their symbolic little flags is just about the exact wrong image of how our incredible alliance works. And so there weren't photos or cameras in the Tony Blinken meeting, and I bet that's like all the formal and informal meetings that happen between these two countries as allies. We are shoulder to shoulder. We don't always see eye to eye, but there's a lot of power in that. We don't need to be in lockstep. And I think you're going to see that. I think President Biden, I mean, they said, we'll make a decision, I think is how Mark phrased it. He said the other day, he has made his decision. Now, he's not going to go telegraph it and tell our enemies what we're going to go do. But he said he's made his decision, and it may be more than one thing, and it may play out over time.
But there's been so much talk about de-escalation, and all we've seen is escalation and a lack of deterrence.
I think there's four things, and we should link them with the word and, not the word but. We want to make sure our partner in Israel has a right to defend itself and is capable of defending its people after the horrific attacks of October 7th. And we want to see the stop of Palestinian and Israeli lives being lost in that area. And we want to see these hostages released and a humanitarian pause to be able to do that. And we want to, I have five, and we want to make sure that this does not spread beyond it. And we must hold responsible those people who killed 3 American servicemen and women and injured many more. We have to be able to do, and we can, and we have proven, we can do more than one thing at the same time. And those are not, they often work at cross purposes, but they're not hopelessly at cross purposes.
I mean, Joe Biden is certainly known as a hawk when it comes to foreign policy. I mean, we, of course, remember some of the kind of horrific rhetoric he was coming out at the beginning of the conflict, supporting the slaughter of Palestinians, effectively. But he has now changed his tone, and even he is waking up to the realization that what's going on is actually escalating and not, de-escalating, as it were. But there has certainly been a change of tone, a sharp change of tone in the past few weeks, undoubtedly due to the killings, not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. And as Mark was highlighting in his report, everybody has in mind a huge humanitarian crisis as well. And yesterday, even so-called moderate Israeli protesters were objecting to aid going into Gaza. And this has certainly caused some revulsion across the world. So I think there needs to be some... if you look at the UK, for example, Foreign Secretary David Cameron has always been the kind of restrained supporter of the Palestinian cause, but always also concerned about...
Well, he's now said in the last 36 hours...
Yeah, he's also now being very pragmatic and optimistically bringing about the idea of a two-state solution.
As is Secretary of State Blinken saying the same thing, echoing President Biden's thing. And I just think on your point, President Biden was, yes, very staunch in support of Israel after that horrific attack. And he was talking about Hamas as a terrorist organization, which is what our country has designated it. And that's what he was talking about, not the Palestinian people.
OK, do stay with us. Lots more coming up on the programme. This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up, could there soon be a blank space on TikTok? Hear why Taylor Swift's music could be removed from the platform tonight.
It's not mobile phones per se, but it's with smartphones, and in particular the very addictive by design technology that they put in the hands of kids 24/7. And the stats on these speak for themselves. 91% of our 11-year-olds have a smartphone, and they lose, on average, 3 hours, 20 minutes of their day to that phone. And, we are seeing the impacts of this everywhere we look across an entire cohort of children. So our issue is, by all means, give your child a phone. If we can have a GPRS phone, text functionality, a phone that they can call people on, fantastic. But really, the kind of smartphone addictive technology is not suitable for children.
At the end of the day, we live in a digitised world, and it is, quite frankly, ridiculous to expect under 16s to not exist within that world, create something that doesn't exist for them, till the day they turn, say 17, maybe 16, where they can now fully integrate into our digital society. It's heavy-handed, and to be honest, it's lazy, when we could be teaching our young people how to responsibly use possibly the most powerful invention that humanity has ever happened across. That we have such wealth of information in our pockets all the time. We need to teach our young people how to use that in the best way possible, rather than just this heavy-handed ban.
So look, that makes sense when you say it, but actually the reality is it is failing for children and parents. So, you have an issue here that has become a cohort-wide problem. All children have phones, most of the parents have phones. The truth is parents aren't using their phones responsibly. We are failing our children, and monkey see, monkey do. So we are setting this terrible example, and our children, just like us, are becoming addictive to this technology. So, the state, there is a point at which a state intervenes to protect society, protect adults, protect children, when we're failing to protect our children from harm, and we have reached that point.
The state should intervene and ensure that we integrate the technology into the way young people learn, and we teach them to use it responsibly. Shouldn't be a government's role to just embark on some regressive policy because they don't, and parents sometimes don't know how to deal with a technology. We should be ambitious and look forward and work out how to make something that is, at the end of the day, an amazing tool, something that young people and adults use responsibly.
From the biggest artists in the world to hidden talent, TikTok has played a big role in recent years in helping songs go viral. Majestic there with a remix of the Boney M track Rasputin, and before that, Taylor Swift. Soon though, TikTokers may be left unable to use her songs in their videos. That's because a deal between record label Universal and the social media site will expire at midnight tonight. The two have been locked in a dispute over payments to artists, AI and online safety. So what do those in the music industry make of it all? Well, I'm joined now by the DJ behind that remix you just heard, Majestic, who's a broadcaster on Kiss FM and TalkSport. Thank you so much, Majestic, for joining us here on the programme. I mean, you know, we just heard a little bit there of your remix. You know all too well what it means to go viral and then for the demand for you to keep that up.
Absolutely. You know, when we had the Rasputin remix in 2021, it took off beyond belief. It became a platinum-selling record around the world, even to the point I was playing festivals in Malta for the likes of affected DJs like James Hype playing it around the world. You know, and that is the power of TikTok. So we all know too well the power of TikTok. However, you know, when it comes to royalty rates, etc., within the music industry, it's becoming more and more difficult for artists, especially songwriters, to live at the current rate of royalties. And now TikTok aren't the only guilty party. If you look across all the DSPs like Spotify, etc., there needs to be a massive revolution and evolution in how those things are divvied up for musicians and artists, because at the moment it was really difficult, and I can see Universal's point.
I guess, you know, the thing about royalties, I mean, even before TikTok and Spotify, the issue of royalties to artists has been an ongoing problem.
Absolutely, and in the days of physical sales and CDs and vinyls, there was always the clauses of, you know, packages and breakages and all these hidden clauses. And now we're in a bit of a crazy situation with the way that the digital music market has evolved. And so many, you know, youngsters and the generation growing up, their record shop is TikTok. They are finding records on TikTok. They're finding their new favorite artists. So the thing is, we know the power of the platform, and you can create
in fact,
a career
I mean, it's
on there.
not just those looking, it's also talent emerging.
Absolutely, and you know, this is becoming the A&R's go-to hotspots now. You know, once upon a time, it was a music venue where an up-and-coming artist might be performing, they might be going on tour. You know, I've spent many hours in major labels meetings, and the first thing they talked about are TikTok and stats and facts. And you know, this is where they're getting all their data from. And the thing is, with such a data-driven society, TikTok can provide that for them and show them what's trending and what's hot. But the problem with that is as well, virality happens and we're losing the art.
Just Majestic, I mean, what do you think should happen now? You know, do you think this will make an actual difference?
It's not going to make a difference until every single party, from the record labels to the digital streaming sites and sites, etc., like TikTok, come together and try and work out something that's fair, because TikTok know that the artists and the labels need their platform. Their platform is the biggest platform in the world. We have so many users on there, discovering artists, discovering music. And as you rightly say, you can be you know, a kid in your bedroom starting out, and you can get found and find glory on TikTok. So it's a wonderful platform. And as I say, I found the benefit from TikTok. But as you said after that, the pressure to replicate that is so tough.
Majestic, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. Now, before we go, let's just leave you with these images. Dozens of tractors descending on Brussels. Farmers have been protesting across Belgium and France for several days now, blocking roads and causing major disruption. They're angry about environmental rules, rising costs and cheap imports. And tomorrow, their aim is to take their concern to EU leaders meeting in Brussels. So we will no doubt have more of those images for you tomorrow. That's all for tonight's programme. Thanks for watching. We heard emotional testimony tonight and calls for more international action to help those most vulnerable during war. Soon, the hope is the United Nations and Israel will make their findings public. We'll be back at 9 p.m. tomorrow night. The news at 10 is next. Good night.